to use lots of repetitions.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's it. So when you say what do I specifically use, it's more mechanical tension.
So it's more powerlifting, cleans, deadlifts, things along those lines.
Is exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not built like a bodybuilder, but you're built like someone who's very strong.
Yeah. And I think that's it, where you start. And that's not to say, when you look at, to use you as an example. So if we had you in the sports lab, we would say, okay, what is your strength deficit? So your strength deficit is say we had you on, the leg press, and we said, Joe, we want to look at how much force your legs can generate with you just using basically your training strength. Your training strength is defined as the strength that you would use just leg pressing, not getting you all like side of pre-workouts, smelling salts, none of that. We would just say, Joe, go and leg press, and you just leg press. And that's what you can generate there. But then in the sports lab back at Loughborough University, we would start using basically using electrical impulses to make the muscles contract beyond what you could generate yourself. So that is what your body could generate without you trying to send those impulses to the body. It's you, the actual potential muscle, the strength of the muscles themselves.
How do you determine that?
Like I said, basically electrocuting the muscles and stimulating it involuntarily.
And through that, do they measure it? How?
So then that measures your maximal output with you not trying to use it yourself. It's involuntary. So that is something that you wouldn't have control over.
So how do they do that?
Like essentially electrocuting you.
But what is it, like electrodes that slap on your legs and they force you to extend your legs?
Yeah, you would have seen it. Yeah, exactly.
But that you lift a weight with that?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
So that's what they do?
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
So you would be sitting in a leg press.
Or
anything.
Jolt your legs,
quad
extensions.
And it would make your legs extend?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they would monitor your strength. So the difference between that, all of a sudden they'll say, okay, this over here, your training strength, is what you could do, Joe, when I was just saying, okay, lift that.
Right.
And it's what you were going, okay, I'll lift it. And then over here, when it's involuntary, that is what you could actually do. That's the potential of the muscles.
What's usually the higher number?
Oh, absolutely. Well, so it's always involuntary.
Really?
Always. Yeah, absolutely.
By how much?
Well, and that's the strength deficit. So do you see what I mean? So, okay, so over here, this is what you could generate when you're just going, okay, 1, 2, 3, and I'm lifting it myself. Okay, that done. And over here is what we do when it's involuntary. Now, if there's a big deficit, okay, so if there's a huge deficit between the two.
That means you're a pussy?
It means, your words, not mine. It means if there's a large deficit between the two, it means that you have muscle mass, but you're not fully using it.
Right.
So you might see a large deficit between the two if you had a bodybuilder, for instance, because they've got a lot of muscle mass, but they're not using it. Does that make sense? So
why aren't they using it?
Because its strength is functional. So they've got all this muscle mass, but they're not recruiting it. They've not actually trained strength, because strength is neuromuscular.
So when a bodybuilder does like high repetitions, and what was the type of load that you were calling that? How that was causing hypertrophy?
So that's metabolic stress.
Metabolic stress. So just a sheer number of sets.
Yeah.
Just constant repetitions over and over and over again with not that high a weight.
Yes, and that's metabolic. But then mechanical tension is when it's more powerlifting-esque.
Right.
So there's your difference between the two. So the reason being is so when you start looking at mechanical tension, that might produce an athlete who has a smaller strength deficit.
Right.
So when, again, using you as an example, if there was a smaller strength deficit between what you could voluntarily leg press, leg extension, hamstring extension, and then involuntary, there's a smaller deficit. I would liken it to, okay, Joe, you have this much muscle mass, but you're using a lot of your potential. You're using it already. It's almost like you've got a Formula One car with a huge engine, but you're using it to its full extent. And this is why I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but this is why when you start looking at bodybuilding centric work, so this idea of increasing muscular hypertrophy, it can be a good thing when you understand that strength deficit. So you might have an athlete who you go, okay, you have a small strength deficit. It's very small. So for the muscle mass that you have, you're using it to its absolute full potential. It's like you have a very small car, but you are just pushing down the accelerator so hard and it can't go anymore.
It's just redlined.
Exactly. So the option that we have is to increase the size of the car. the option we have is to increase the size of your muscle mass. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. What kind of training were you doing to increase your capacity for work while maintaining the mass?
Yeah, and this goes. It's a bit of a strange story. So this goes back to something I almost call, horsepower programming, which I think is so often lost now. I think training is very specific. When you go into the gym, are you training for strength, speed, stamina? Whereas horsepower programming, I almost borrowed from Soviet Union principles. So you start looking at general physical preparedness, as it was known. And this just idea of you take an athlete, certainly a younger athlete, and you're trying to increase their work capacity by non-specific movements. So you'll get an athlete, you're handed. Imagine, okay, you're a young kid just growing up, and your parents hand you to me. I'm your coach, and I say, okay, I don't know if Joe's going to be big, strong. I don't know if he's going to be able to run far or fast. I don't know. So what we're going to do is just increase your sort of neuromuscular efficiency and work capacity. And so by doing that, it's kind of jumps, throws, non-specific, these natural movement patterns. And we get you to do lots and lots of this. What that's doing is work capacity, your body's ability to positively tolerate training and given intensity or duration. And I think from the Great British Swim, when a lot of people will say, how was it that you were able to tolerate those 12 hours a day, the jellyfish things and everything? For me, one of the biggest things was going back to, and this is going to sound so odd, but I ran a marathon pulling a car 3 years ago, I think now. And so that is almost the perfect embodiment of horsepower programming, in that sheer stress on the body, but it's not a specific skill.
When you say you ran a marathon behind a car,
pulling a car.
You mean pulling a car? So in front of a car?
Yeah.
Not behind a car?
No, yeah. So it was...
you pulled a car and ran a marathon?
Yeah.
What the fuck, dude? Look at you.
No, so yeah,
You seem so normal. That's what's so confusing to me. Like, if I met you, there's something about a lot of these endurance people. Well, I guess not Courtney Dowalter. She's so carefree and silly. But you're very loose and relaxed. I always consider like those people like dark. There's some darkness to those extreme endurance athletes.
Yeah.
There's darkness that they're running from some darkness. You know what I mean?
No, I do. I've had this conversation with a few people because they said something similar, and I think it's to slightly go off on another tangent here, because I think we've covered the physical aspect and work capacity, which I've addressed, but I think, and this is one thing I genuinely just wanted to almost quiz you on and get your thoughts on this, is certainly throughout the Great British Swim, it subjected my body to a fatigue like I've never experienced before. It was just, sleep deprivation, just ligaments, tendons in my shoulders, just wondering what was going on. And for me, you almost develop a split personality, in that there's times when I'd quite often say you need to swim with a smile, because, it's 157 days. If you're stressed, or it's like a marathon where you grit your teeth and you try and get through it, I think we're very aware that, the body is this complex biochemical organism. And if you're stressed, cortisol levels spike, inflammation, your immune system, everything's affected. So for me, I was treating it not like a marathon. I had to treat it, swim with a smile, think this is life now,
right?
At sea. But then equally, there were times when, I wouldn't swim with a smile. It was just, Corrie being a great example. I certainly wasn't all that happy then. And for me, it's those times when I say you've got to just get feral. You've really just got to. And a good friend of mine, back in England, SAS trained, and he said to me, Ross, you're a really nice guy and everything, but there's going to be times when you just need to, no smiles and just get feral, which I, thinking about it, and because I had 12 hours to think a day, I was mulling this over in my head. For me, it goes back to Tim Noakes' central governor theory, looking at how fatigue is an emotionally driven state that we use to pull that physiological handbrake. So, for those listening, sort of 16 miles into a marathon, you might be saying, no way, I can't keep putting one foot in front of the other. There's no way. And then all of a sudden, 25 miles in, your family and friends are clapping you, and you get that second wind and you start sprinting. And for me, looking at the sort of central governor theory, I found that in complete exhaustion, like when you absolutely have nothing left, you almost go into this feral state, so like an